Welcome to this episode of the Machine Sessions, and my guest today is Mary Harrington, who we have. I was going to say we crossed swords before, but actually we haven't crossed swords at all. We've I don't know what we've crossed, but we've had many conversations before in life and on the internet matrix. So I wanted to talk to Mary again about 100 different things. So Mary, for those who do not know her, is a writer. She is the author of Feminism Against Progress. She's a contributing editor at Unheard, and for me, she's the developer of many excellent, memorable phrases such as the meat Lego matrix and fully automated luxury Gnosticism and cyborg culture. And if you don't know what any of them are, we can talk about them now. So, hello, Mary.
Hi, Paul. It's great to
How,
be here.
shall I say the other thing that people have described you as? We were discussing before we came
It's,
on
it's the
air
only real way to introduce me.
whether we should introduce you. Mary has apparently recently been described by somebody who will remain anonymous as the Paul Kingsnorth for ladies. So neither of
I'm the
us are sure.
distaff Paul Kingsnorth.
Neither of us are sure whether this is a good thing from either of our perspectives, but we just had to drop it in there. So welcome, Paul Kingsnorth for ladies. Perhaps you
Well,
could.
welcome, Mary Harrington for
No,
men.
Mary Harrington for men. So this is all good. We've got everything covered already. So any for anyone who is watching who is either a lady or a man who would like to who may not be aware of you, I'm sure a lot of people watching this will know your work already. But for those who don't, you've had an intellectual journey, which I suppose is maybe some way similar to mine. Maybe that's why we're the thing of the other thing, which is sort of starting off as young lefty activist types and ending up critics of progress and technology. I just wonder how that, I mean, you can't sum up your life in 5 seconds, but how does that journey look to you now? How do you move from one state to the other?
I mean, I think I can probably do like a 5 bullet point version because I revisited this recently. So we grew up at the end of history. I think we're rough contemporaries in that way. You're sort of end of history vintage, I think, as well. Um, came of age having been one-shotted by postmodernism. Tried very hard to square that circle for most of my 20s, and then had a sort of quarter life crisis slash mental breakdown slash everything breakdown. Um, Concurrently with the global financial crash. Did have been trying ever since to pass the had to make sense of the personal catastrophe that was in conjunction with what I see as a sort of an analogous catastrophe, with its own character. Obviously, I don't imagine the world follows my inner life, but something happening, concurrently in the world outside, that sort of crystallized with the global financial crash, or in the period between 9/11 and the crash, and which was, maybe very crudely the end of history, and trying to understand what it means that history has started again. Um, I I spent most of that not writing, or not writing opinions anyway. I spent many years in the salt mines as a commercial copywriter and various other types of writing for a living, but only came to writing professionally in about 2019, so 5 years ago, give or take. After I'd already long since given up any prospect of becoming a an opinion haver, or really having anything to do in any large role to play in public life or conversation at all. I was entirely content with being a stay-at-home mum and just being a normal person. And then it all sort of happened by mistake. I wrote a couple of columns, and then COVID happened, and somehow I'm not really sure why, but I just ended up having the opportunities were just there, so I took them, and now here we are. I mean, that's slightly more than 5 bullet points, but that
No,
brings us
that's
up to
pretty
date.
good. That's pretty
But
good.
I feel like, sort of, in a sense, I just got lucky in that, I got blackpilled maybe 5 to 7 years ahead of the majority. So I'd done a lot of the soul searching and thinking before Trump and Brexit happened. I was already radicalized at that point in various kind of pertinent ways. And then, so by the time COVID happened, which for me, I've sort of come to think of the period roughly 2007 to 2021 as a sort of 14-year interregnum where modernity ended, really, because the print era comprehensively ended. The smartphone revolution happened. I think this is probably where your work and mine overlap. Um, The first iPhone launched in 2007, and by 2021, the culture, certainly in the English speaking world, and I think over much of the developed world in general, uh, if you'll forgive that problematic phrase, it has shifted comprehensively online over that 14-year period. And in the course of that, a great weirding has happened. The
Mm.
economies have gone skew relative to the way they worked before. People's conceptions of what it means to be a person has gone skew relative to how things felt before. Culture, politics, everything feels new and different and very unstable. And my and where and I think where our work has overlapped has been in trying to make sense of the cultural, the spiritual, the human, I suppose, aspect of what it feels like to have had our culture as it feels sort of colonized by a new type of technology and a new spirit of technicity, right? Or a type of technological civilization which wasn't, or perhaps was present in a germinal sense before, but wasn't comprehensively, sort of overwhelmingly, sort of domineeringly present in the way it is now. And I found your Against the Machine extraordinarily lucid in having captured that sense, and having captured the sense of human revolt that I think is extends well beyond just you and me. And the early response to the sort of preliminary writing and exploration you did around that speaks to the fact that you're far from the only person who senses this, and senses that something momentous is afoot, even if we can't see it, but people can feel it.
Yeah, it's exactly
Um,
that, isn't it?
yeah. But
So
yeah, I think I mean, my relation to all of this is paradoxical in the sense that I love the internet. I think I like it a lot more than you do,
I
and
think you do, yeah.
I'm possibly more um I'm more gung ho about how the only way out is through.
Hmm.
Whereas I think you take a more sort of quietist,
Yeah, yeah,
sort
yeah.
of,
I mean, I sort of
wi-
share. I basically share that view when I'm being reasonable with myself, because the only way out is through, because we're in here already.
right.
But the
I mean,
actual,
here we are talking to each other on the internet, right?
exactly. But then my spirit revolts against the whole thing and wants to burn it all down. But it's not burnable, so we we
No
do.
one, no one has found the big red off switch yet.
No, no, exactly.
Until they do, we have to keep putting one foot in front of
It's
the
a
other,
kind of
right?
an interesting philosophical question for people, actually. If you suddenly did find the big red off switch, would you press it? I always think that kind of. That's I
Do you know?
think.
I've never asked, but I mean, you clearly would, right?
I would press the off switch. Well, the thing is, you and I are actually both old enough to remember the world before the internet.
That's
So
right.
it's not a
That's right.
shocking thing to imagine living in one, because it was only 30 years ago. So it's
Right.
not
But I mean,
even
it
look
would be, if there was a big red off switch and you pressed it, it would be a nuclear detonation in a lot of people's lives.
culturally, it
Um,
certainly would. Yeah, no, absolutely would now. And it's interesting how quickly that, as you say, how quickly we have shifted into this thing that actually you call the cyborg era, right?
mhm.
People
Yeah.
go to
I
your
mean,
website.
my argument in feminism against progress is that the cyborg era actually began 50 years ago with the
Yeah.
contraceptive pill,
Well, I was going to
because
ask.
that was the first technology which we that was the first sort of that was the first time when we embraced collectively, within our law and institutions and social practices and so on, a technology which doesn't set out to fix something which is broken, but break something which is working.
Yeah.
Um, which is it's an absolute sea change in what we understand medical technologies to be licit, to be permissible to do. And a great deal else has followed in the wake of that. And I think it's really interesting to sort of ponder, and it's not something I have a very sort of comprehensive theory of, but it's interesting to ponder the relation between that entry point into transhumanism and the digital one,
Mm.
because they're actually temporally they're very closely connected, in the sense that by it was the same decade that the contraceptive pill was legalized in the first half of the 1960s, and the earliest precursor to the internet was being developed by the US military in the same decade, and was fully realized in DARPA by the end of that decade. So actually, I mean, the digital revolution really began 50 more than half a century ago as well. But I think there's a real inflection point that has arrived for us at the human level with smartphones. I mean, I know this is a technology that you just categorically refuse to have,
I do not
and
like.
it's one that I have a very ambivalent relationship with.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that's been an extreme accelerant in.
It has, and I think it's also a stepping stone. The smartphone is a bridge technology.
Mm,
The next thing we move on to is the embodied chip, and then you don't need the smartphone, and it's very. we move towards the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies. But so you think transhumanism has already happened? That's a phrase you
Yeah, yeah,
coined.
yeah, 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 yeah. I actually
Right.
think the next book, which I've literally just the last couple of weeks agreed to do, I'm very excited about, is about it's about politics after the singularity, which is my view, in my view, has already happened.
Hmm.
Um,
So when was the singularity? Is it
I
what
mean,
you
the
talking
singularity
about?
event was the arrival of smartphones.
Starts at that point,
Um,
right? Okay, yeah. No,
well, or it was the point at which we became fused with our digital technologies.
yeah, I think
As
that's
I mean, we were there. We are speculating about what would happen if you press the big red off switch.
Hmm.
And I mean, I imagine even you would be inconvenienced
Oh
if
yeah.
somebody
Well, I
pressed
mean,
the big red off
I
switch.
wouldn't
I
be
mean,
able
how
to
would you
make a
make your
living.
money?
I wouldn't be able to make a living at
Right.
this point. I mean, there'd be
All
no
right.
writers couldn't survive these days without it either. So,
No, 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 no. And I'm bound up in it in a great many other ways as well,
and then I'd have to
as
go
are
back and
we
get a
all.
proper job. So, I'd have to actually go
I
and do
mean, imagine.
it. Well, it wouldn't be a bad thing. So
Oh,
So look, I'm looking at the way that we both have into this criticism of the machine, where we've both arrived at a very similar place. Your way in is basically through feminism. It's through your young life as a radical feminist, and then your questioning of what feminism actually says to women about their bodies.
yeah.
Is, I mean, that's the way I would see
I
it,
think
right?
that's right. I think
You
that's
start
right.
to
But I
see
think what
feminism
I've
as a kind of project of so-called liberation, which is actually part of the machine, effectively.
Yeah, I think the reasoning steps go roughly like this. I mean, I started out with a concrete question that I wanted to. Oh, I mean, fairly concrete. I mean, none of I'm always a bit head in the clouds. But the question I set out to answer was: is it possible to be a feminist if you don't believe in progress?
Hmm.
And I mean, answering that question is the entirety of feminism against progress. And the answer is very simple. Yes, yes, but it depends what you mean by feminism, and it depends what you mean by progress.
Of course.
Um, Right. It's a very English lit
Hmm.
undergraduate answer. But I mean that's the long and the short of it. Um, but in the course of doing that, and actually since I worked on that, the my sort of big idea, I suppose, that I came to is, when I said it depends what you mean by feminism, where I took that was to reread the history of the women's movement in sort of crypto Marxist terms as a history of technology, as being a set of concrete, embodied, culturally grounded responses by women to the specific challenges thrown up for women in their local contexts by the Industrial Revolution. Um, and a huge amount, its internal contradictions as a movement makes sense if you understand them if you see them in those terms. The class inflected nature of it makes a great deal more sense if you see it as a set of culturally and historically specific responses to problems occasioned by the solvent power of technology. But the deeper I went into this, and the more I realized that actually a great deal of this analysis doesn't just apply to women. I mean, with the women's movement is a way in, and it's a very intelligible one. It's something you can sort of, women's history. There's a great deal of writing on it, and it's something, the sex war is something that people are endlessly interested in because we all have one, right? Um, so so that was my way in, but I found myself grappling again and again and again with this. When we talk about technology, what is it that we're talking about? Where does it come from? What is it trying to do? How does it dovetail with the sort of with the money system? What is it we're trying to achieve with it? These are not just questions which are pertinent to family formation and domestic life. They're questions that really go to the heart of the entirety of culture since, I guess, since at least Francis Bacon,
Hmm.
if not William of Ockham. I mean, well, and this is all sort of directions that I've taken it, I suppose, since I read. I didn't hit people around the head with William of Ockham in the course of
Yeah, you got to start. You got
in
to start more gently than that.
yeah. I mean, it's sort of turtles all the way down, every time you
Yes.
think you've got to the bottom of it, there's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
else.
Well, how far
Um
back do you trace the machine is also one of those terrible, endless questions that you
right,
literally
you're
end up
right.
going
It's
to.
it's that it's exactly that. It's exactly that. I mean, I know you've sort of you handled that quite elegantly, I seem to remember in the book.
Well, I did my
Um
best, but you end up you really you're going to end up going back to the development of language, I would say, or
right. And this is
chemistry at all.
actually,
So, you know,
just to sort of complete that, there's this slightly kind of disjointed ramble. The in the I looked at the sort of biotech aspect of where we are in feminism against progress, but I was conscious of the fact that it's I sort of leaned into that because, in a book about feminism and women's embodiment, because it's a second industrial transition which precipitates us into into this transhumanist era which we're trying to make sense of. And really the argument of the book was very simply that we can't transpose the the basic premises of industrial era feminism into the transhumanist era without just committing atrocities. We can't. These just don't apply anymore. They don't work. We need a different grounding for any kind of any kind of women's movement that's capable of remaining human in the context of what our technologies are now proposing to do for us. But it was mostly focused on biotech, and I mean, at the time, the principal vanguard for a lot of these issues was gender ideology, transgenderism, which feels sort of slightly in abeyance now, not entirely, but somewhat. But it's not the only thing, right? And I didn't delve as much as I think I could have done into the digital aspect of it. But it feels very much part of the same picture. The digital revolution is another aspect of the same phenomenon, in the sense that it has the same self-objectifying qualities. It has the same, it propagates and amplifies that sense of our separability from our own bodies. It's the engine for a lot of the economic developments which feed into and are fed by the transhumanist revolution. I mean, the digital and biotech revolutions are really they feel like two aspects of the same
I think
of the
so.
same machine.
I think
And
so.
so I guess The King and the Swarm, which is the book I'm working on now, is trying to explore the sort of the information revolution aspect of that. And my sort of working hypothesis is that there have been three singularities so far, not one. Where the first one being literacy itself, which drove the Greeks mad, and the second one being the printing press, which drove the Catholics mad, and the third one being the one that we've just lived through, which is driving everyone mad.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
So there
That
we go.
makes a lot of sense. But it is all part of the same revolution. I mean, my way into the same questions was through environmental activism, which starts off as quite a simple desire to stop the machine destroying forests and mountains, and
Yes.
then very quickly realizes that what's actually happening, at least part of the time, and certainly back in the 90s, this was a big campaign issue, is exactly biotech. It's biotech crops, it's genetically modified crops, it's all the rest of that stuff. And then you see the environmental movement itself, which has been my big beef with it becoming effectively technologized itself. And
Yes.
I mean, I
Mold
wrote a whole
grown in
essay
vats.
collection. I have a whole book complaining about this. Confessions of a
Yeah.
recovering environmentalist. But then what you see is that maybe this is what you see about the feminist movement as well. You see, certainly for me, I saw a movement that I thought existed to resist the machine, basically using machine logic against itself and being sucked
Yeah.
in by it. But
Yeah.
the thing that ties all of this together is actually the title of another podcast conversation we had about 3 years ago, which is The War Against Reality, which I thought was quite a good title, which is actually also
Yes.
the war against nature. I mean, fundamentally, it's
Yes. Yes.
living,
Yes. Yes.
the
Yes.
war against nature. So the war against the human body, whether it's the
Mm,
female or the male body, is the
mm.
same thing as the war against all other natural forms, and it's all
Yes.
seen as and it's presented as by the Singularity guys as a form of liberation. It's all
Yep.
about liberation from matter. Essentially, is what we're going.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is why you like
And
to talk
this is
about.
where you need to go rummaging in the medievals.
Mm,
I've ended, in my quest to not reinvent the wheel, I've ended up back at scholastic metaphysics,
mm,
because actually, if you don't have that stuff to hand, you have no. I mean, you can argue for human nature, or the fact that humans have a normative developmental pathway. But
mm.
if you're trying to do it without formal and final cause, it's like trying to do DIY with a half a brick and a rusty spanner,
Yeah.
where you could have a whole sort of well-equipped toolbox. And I don't know. I have this is a slight sidebar. I have this frustration with scholastics, because I don't understand why they're all so dry.
Mm.
I don't understand why their writing is so boring and so chop logic, when as far as I can make out, what they seem to be describing is the living stuff of the cosmos.
Mm.
So why do they write such boring stuff
Yeah,
about it?
there's a
I
lot
don't
of
get
problems there. Well, it's nice
that.
being an Eastern Orthodox Christian because I don't have to read any of it. But But yeah, I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
one question
I'm
you
not
could
a
ask
I'm
about
not a Roman
academics,
Catholic.
isn't it?
I'm not a Roman Catholic. I'm just a rummager in
Yeah, yeah.
things.
Well, you need to be
Mm.
because you need to exactly ask this question of where the West in particular went. Maybe did it go wrong or was it always on this path? How did the machine develop here? How did this way of seeing develop here? Where does
Yeah,
it come
yeah, yeah,
from? Why
yeah.
does it
Well, I
particularly
mean,
emerge here?
it's intimately bound up with the Reformation. It's
Mm.
intimately bound up with the printing press, and
Yeah.
it's intimate. I mean, but Francis Bacon, and it's intimately bound up with this sort of backlash against the Scholastics, and their boring chop logic, which
Mm.
I can easily see was sort of had become exhausted and sterile by
Mm.
the end of the Middle Ages, and people were sort of desperate for new ways of seeing. And then Francis Bacon comes along. He says, we can just throw all of this stuff out of the window. Formal and final cause has no basis in reality. And in fact, what we should do is pull apart reality and understand how it works.
Mm.
And then, and this is the money shot, of course, pun intended. Once we've pulled it apart, we can master it and we can make it do our bidding.
Yeah.
Um, and everything else, everything machinic, so pretty much follows from that.
And literally rape it, actually. If you read Bacon's writing, the way he talks
Yep.
about mastering and dominating nature is
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. It's very
metaphors of
kinky.
it
Yeah.
is very he's clearly channeling something repressed, but it's very he's very open about it. You know, we are
Yeah,
going
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
dominate and master
Mm.
the natural world and therefore ourselves. As famously, C.S. Lewis says that, you know, that human nature will be the last victim of the war against nature.
Yes.
And we're
Yes.
at that point now. So we've been fighting this war
We
against
are.
God knows how long, and now we've extended the war to take in human nature, and we have the technology to do it. That's how it
I
seems.
mean, we think we have the technology to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm actually more optimistic than Lewis was
Hmm.
about the actual prospects of abolishing man.
Yes,
I
you
mean,
are.
I can, and the reason I think we're going to try, and I
Hmm.
think the results will be predictably hellish,
Hmm.
and I don't think it's going to work.
Yeah.
Um, I don't because I don't think it's possible. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, my basis for believing this is 50 years of receipts on the efforts to abolish sex. I
Hmm.
mean, sex as in sex dimorphism, not sex as in reproductive. Although, in a sense, we're doing better at
Well,
abolishing sex in the
there's quite a lot of efforts to abolish that as well. I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But and yet, children are still being born, albeit
yeah.
in slightly reduced numbers relative to 100 years ago. And sex dimorphism is alive and well.
Hmm.
Um, all of our efforts to flatten the differences between the sexes have so far come more or less to naught. Um, Men are still men. There's still a Paul Kingsnorth for ladies, as distinct from the just actual
Yeah,
Paul Kingsnorth.
which is handy for us
Um,
really, because then we can both have work. It's good.
then we both got something to do on the internet
Exactly.
that
So
isn't quite the same.
till we're replaced by AI Paul Harrington, and then no one needs to do anything. So it's all good. So well, I mean, this is the essence of progress, as perhaps you're defining it, and maybe I'm defining it as well. Is exactly that war against nature in almost every respect. If you look at some of the obvious examples from political movements that describe themselves as progressive, obviously the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution
Mm,
would be the extreme examples. They're absolutely full of examples of the attempts to abolish everything from the existence of the family to the existence of religion to the landscape itself, which is going to be
yep,
rationalized. I mean,
yep, yep.
absolutely everything is going to be rationalized and made equal. And as you say, it never actually fundamentally works, and it always ends up in hellish mass murder. And yet, something at the heart of the culture that we're in that still wants to keep going back to the same thing, still has this dream of, I mean, I certainly see it in fundamentally spiritual terms and actually quite Christian terms. I see it as a kind of Christian heresy, actually.
Yes, completely,
I see it
completely.
clearly as an attempt to take the Christian story of effectively liberation through, well, effectively, well, dying and going to paradise if you've followed the correct
Mm,
path. But we don't need to die, we do it here. And we end up not
that's
dying.
right.
We create the
We
paradise.
immanentize the eschaton.
We can, yeah, exactly, and we can create our own immortality and all the rest of it. And it's very deep in us, that it's really fundamentally at the heart of it, and it leads to it's at the root of all of the technological attempts to
Mhm.
abolish limits in nature. That's
Yeah,
how it
yeah,
seems
yeah.
to be anyway. I don't
Yeah,
know
I
how you,
remember I
yeah.
read something about this. Eric Vogelin,
Hmm.
who pointed the finger at communism and fascism uh, as both efforts to immanentize the eschaton,
Yeah,
in
completely, yeah.
slightly different registers. And I sort of feel like, there's William F. Buckley saying, don't immanentize the eschaton. I think he made little lapel pins like that for his society. Don't
Yes.
immanentize the eschaton. And I sort of feel I do often think that that it's underappreciated how far nonetheless 20th and 21st century liberal Western civilization has done its
Mm.
level best to do just that.
Yeah.
We just, I mean, here we are. We both began in the end of history.
Mm.
If that wasn't precisely that,
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know what is. Um,
Well,
I don't know. I think there's sort of several competing Christian heresies. It's like a whole sort of basket of whole basket of them, because there's a bit of Pelagianism thrown in there. In that there we are trying to engineer humans to make us more perfect.
mm.
And there's a bit of Gnosticism thrown in there,
Yeah,
in that
lots and
people
lots
are
of.
trying to is.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Here's the crucial. I mean, Gnosticism gets thrown around a lot, especially in the context of the trans thing.
Mm.
But I think the critical difference, and it's a really fundamental one, and it's absolutely central to what's distinctive about today, is that the ancient Gnostics were rejecting the physical world because what they wanted to escape it to the Platonic world of forms.
Mm.
Right. They had a reference point which was outside what they saw as a poor corrupted copy of a much higher, more
Mm.
beautiful and more perfect
Yeah.
realm, and that's what they wanted to get to. But the modern kind of iteration of this hatred of the physical doesn't explicitly reject the idea that there's any kind of form. So there's no there, and there's no there's nowhere to go to.
Yeah.
There's just power.
It's
There's no,
exactly that.
nothing else, just pure will, just
Precisely,
power.
and that's one reason also why I don't think it's correct to endlessly describe what we're going through now as pagan. You constantly hear
No,
this notion that we're repaganizing, and I see where that comes from, but we're not repaganizing because pagans also had a clear sense of what they believed in, and they had a clear sense of the divine. Um, and we don't have anything. And actually, what we've got now is what you get when you're still fundamentally a Christian society, but you do not have Christ, you do not have God, you do not have a belief in anything beyond the material. You end up trying to create the forms here. You're trying
yep,
to build the
yep,
world
yep,
of
yep.
forms here. You try to build heaven here because you don't, and it's not even a conscious process. It's just
If
a
only we had some
do.
word for a basically Christian moral system that rejects everything except power and individuality.
What would that word be? And
I
where
can't
would it be
think.
leading us? Where would it be
I
leading?
can't possibly
I don't
think.
know. I think somebody needs to do some
No,
research into this, Mary.
it's a real head scratcher. We need a theologian.
It is, isn't it? I'm sure no one's ever come up with this idea before.
No,
So, I mean, so we're jumping into metaphysical territory, and it's funny how
this
it
is
always
risky.
leads you there. It just
Yeah,
leads
yeah,
you there. You can't talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
these
yeah.
things at any depth without actually
Right,
asking
but
yourself
you
about the
can't
of it.
you can't poke at science and technology without realizing very swiftly, if you take it seriously and you take seriously what it's trying to achieve, you can't poke at that stuff without finding yourself very quickly in spiritual territory. Yeah, I mean, because what else? If we're talking about the ontology of natural forms, is that a thing or not?
Hmm.
This is that this is a central metaphysical bone of contention, going back the best part of 1,000 years,
Hmm.
which is, it's been at the core of some of the greatest Christian controversies over the last 1,000 years. And again, that brings home the fact that this is still fundamentally a dispute which is happening inside Christianity.
Hmm.
There are a great many other parts of the world which are not sort of culturally Christian the way we are in Europe, who are also now doing their best to make sense of the technological toolbox that we've unleashed.
Hmm.
But the,
But we're the
the,
ones who
the sort of-
unleashed it.
yes, but right,
That's
we're,
where it
we're,
comes
we're,
from.
we're standing there holding the lid open, going, "Oh,
Oh,
this is
completely.
interesting."
Well, it's interesting that it comes from the west coast of America. Actually, it's interesting. I mean, the concentration of the Silicon Valley argument, the
Yeah.
radical
I
transhumanism.
think the influence of German Romanticism there is very underpriced, very
That's interesting.
underappreciated.
Really?
I
Mm.
mean, this is a slightly eccentric intellectual genealogy.
Mm.
I remember. Why did I go down this? Oh yes, oh yeah, I remember why I went down this rabbit hole. I came to this conclusion by researching the history of nudism in America.
Okay, as you do.
No, no, no. There was
Is
there was
that for
this.
pleasure or just for research?
No, there was a news headline about a cruise of a naked cruise that was departing from Florida for 2 weeks to sail around the Caribbean for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and I just found the idea of a ship full of naked boomers so
I know.
simultaneously so funny
It's
and horrifying.
not
I
a good
just had
image,
to
is
write
it?
something about it. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's clearly, it was sold out, so clearly there's
Well,
demand. But
they were having a good time, clearly. Yeah.
right, I mean, it's not for me, but good on them. I hope they all came back without any tan lines.
Safe to say you're
Um,
not the target market for that one, I think.
no, but I thought, well, this is interesting. How where does nudism come from? And so I just kind of went rummaging around in the history of nudism. Turns out it's very Nazi, um, but not just but what I found interesting was that the principal importers into the United States of nudism as a set of as an ideology, because it really was an ideology. These are people who it was a very romantic impulse
Yes, it was a
in
big
that
thing.
people wanted to cast off the shackles of civilization and
Mm.
express their full natural swinging selves, and free of constraints and tan lines, I guess.
Hmm.
And it was a very German impulse. I mean, you probably never watch Eurotrash. You don't seem like someone who watches
Oh, I
TV.
used to back in the
Um,
day, but that was about 20 years ago. So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean,
a long
I
time.
think it's. But do you remember they used to have a running skit about the naked German?
I
Maybe you
don't
don't
remember
remember
that one,
that.
actually. No, it sounds terrible.
He would just stand there being naked in some sort of unlikely place. But
Right.
anyway, I mean,
Okay.
it's a thing. It's very,
It
nudism is
certainly is.
very popular in Germany. And a huge number of the early pioneers of nudism as a sort of culture,
Mm.
Nacktkultur, it has a name. Somebody famously wrote a book called Nacktkultur, who I think also ended up as a member of the Nazi Party. Anyway, lots of them were also Nazis for some,
Mm.
because a lot of German Romanticism kind of got corrupted into
Yes, it
fascism.
certainly did. Yeah.
But also a lot of German Romanticism migrated to the United States,
Mm.
with the wave of Germans
Right.
who left
Right.
for the New World. And a great many of them discovered that the East Coast was too puritanical
Mm.
to give much time or credence to naked anybody, German or otherwise.
A
And
lot
so
of
they
them.
headed west. And that sort of that romanticism and that sort of impulse to let it all hang out, and that um, desire to go off into the desert and hang loose, um, eventually made its way all the way across America to the United States, and sort of came up for air as hippie culture in the 1960s.
Mm. I
So I mean, German free and once you see that there's a line from German Romanticism to the California hippies, you can't unsee it, right?
mm. That's interesting. Yeah. Actually, I was having a conversation recently with somebody who used to work in Silicon Valley, very closely, quite near the top of it, and left because he just found himself kind of disgusted by the way it was going. But one of the things he said is you wouldn't believe how common wife swapping is in Silicon
Right,
Valley.
right, right.
Literally, one of the reasons he left was that everyone assumed that he and his wife would want to sleep with everybody else, and he wouldn't, and therefore they
Do you
weren't
know,
really
funnily enough,
swapping.
I had a conversation with a German who shall remain nameless just this
Mhm.
morning, who was heavily involved in effective altruism and told me
Right.
that they were well known for just they do their effective altruism and rationalist thing, and then they all have an orgy.
Well, I
This
suppose
is
it's
just
a
what they
form
do.
of effective altruism, isn't it? If you want to look at it that way. Very, very
I
particular
don't know.
form of effective altruism. Just spreading
Yeah.
yourself around, giving yourself to the world. Yeah. So it is deeply corrupted, but it's also deeply metaphysical. The whole thing. Now, you actually talking about metaphysics. So you wrote a piece recently, which lost you some subscribers apparently, and this was about two things that happened in the UK. So it was about firstly the decriminalisation of abortion right up to full
Oh
term,
yes.
which is astonishing,
No,
and then
the
also
piece on, yeah,
the assisted dying.
resisted dying thing.
And you said both of those were a metaphysical attack.
Mm.
And I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered what you meant by it. What's the metaphysical attack? What's the attack on? Or who's the attack by?
I'm sort of hesitant to speculate on who it's by.
Hmm.
I'm short of just waving my arms around and saying Fabians.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, okay. I mean, but
it's all
metaphysically,
it's
who's
all
it by?
Fabians.
Yeah.
Um, but it felt to me like an attack on, or a double-fronted attack on the dignity and sanctity of the human person. And I
Hmm.
know dignity is something that the legalized suicide people like to fight over and worry at and say, well, what's undignified, what's dignified about dying in pain, and
Hmm.
we should put grandma down like a sick dog, because
Hmm.
that's more dignified. Okay. If you say so, a
Hmm.
psycho. But there's how do I put this best? Um, there's a set of very well established, established to the point where until recently they just weren't considered, they were considered self-evident, obvious premises, baked into a long-standing Christian culture to do with how we conceive of people who are vulnerable or who need our care,
Mm.
and what we assume it's licit to do to or for people like that. Whether it's the very young or the very old or the very ill. And of course, these things are as much honoured in the breach as the observance, but there's just saying people don't always live up to their ideals is not an argument against ideals, right?
No,
Or at
indeed.
least it shouldn't be.
No.
Or it only is if you're a liberal.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
mean, if people if religion, I don't know, you could criticize religion on that basis, but the whole fundamental claim of Christianity is nobody can ever live up to really being a Christian. So, but that's the whole point of it.
right. There was only one perfect man and he sacrificed himself
But also,
because everyone
everyone's
else
a
is
sinner,
rubbish
but
at
it's
it.
okay. There's forgiveness for it. So we're all struggling.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And furthermore, there's the next life, so we don't have to try and realize heaven on earth,
well,
which is
indeed,
is a
yeah,
is ought to be a great source of comfort, and I don't understand why people don't see it that way. But yeah, I think I was sort of worrying at these it felt like an attack simultaneously on the, I think, fairly settled, and I had thought, yeah, actually is a reasonably workable compromise that we had in Britain over the question of abortion. I mean, relative to some European countries, our British abortion laws were quite lax. So I believe it was up to 20 weeks. With, or at least abortion is always illegal, but there are circumstances in which it was permissible, but there were restrictions on that, which were approximately from the end of the second trimester onwards. And I think if you were to ask any woman who's ever had a baby, she would most mothers will tell you that um, I don't know. It's an incredibly I'm incredibly sort of nervous about committing myself to this, but I mean, when you're talking about, is it licit? Is it licit to kill or not? And then you've got to try and apply that to a baby who, in a sense, is there from the moment of conception. But I think also, um, off the record, most women, even the ones who are mothers, will tell you that there's also a sense in which a baby comes into being gradually.
mm,
Life might, in one absolute sense, begin at conception. But whether or not but even if you do believe that, there's also a sense in which the baby becomes more babyish over
mm,
the course of gestation. Yeah, I mean that's objectively what gestation is, right? And it's very hard to point at an exact I think Kathleen Stock actually put this really nicely when she said, it's very hard to point at the moment where a small pile of grains becomes a heap.
mm,
But there is a point where it stops just being a handful of grain and becomes
mm.
becomes a heap of grain. Um, so there's the and somewhere, yeah, there's a sort of um, and it felt to me as though English abortion law, until that amendment was passed, had done a sort of tolerable job of balancing a basically incommensurable set of rights and needs and considerations, and come up with something that was basically, that was broadly a settled. It was broadly a
Yes,
settled issue in
yeah,
Britain.
it wasn't an issue at all.
And it wasn't. It just wasn't. It was, apart from for the maximalists and the
Mm,
extremists. And then somebody comes along and says, no, actually, it's licit to
mm,
kill a baby all the way up to the moment of birth.
mm,
And you look at that and you think, well, hang on. Um, yes, we can argue the toss about when it stops being, about when it becomes a baby, but no, but very few, like only a complete psycho will look at a baby into the third trimester and say that's not a baby yet, that's just a
no,
clump
I
of
know,
cells.
and it's okay to kill it. Yeah,
And it's okay to kill it. No, it just isn't.
mm,
And there's no, and there are no circumstances, I think, where that isn't murder. no matter how woeful or terrible the situation of the pregnant mother in question.
Mm.
And if you say that there are some circumstances where that's excusable, then effectively you're condoning infanticide.
And it's difficult to
Um,
actually make an argument that the baby that it's okay to kill a week before it's born is not okay to kill a week after it's born.
just so, and I mean this is the Peter Singer line, isn't it?
Yeah, so which is actually where you end up, where you will end up logically going, not regardless
Yeah.
of what the law does. That's the rationality behind it.
Yeah, and I've sort of, I mean, I really struggle with this because I'm fairly centrist on this stuff.
Mm.
I sort of, thought considered in absolutist terms. I think basically the Roman Catholics are right, but I'm also not a Roman Catholic, so I sort of, I end up kind of going around in circles about it.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, well, when I said it felt like a metaphysical attack, it felt like a very intentional, uh, and very plausible, somewhat coordinated, but a very intentional attempt effort to move the goalposts on some fundamental assumptions, very
Mm.
broadly held in England, over what personhood is and what we owe to the most vulnerable.
Mm. And what you've said yourself, and what's clearly the case, is that those I keep bringing it back to this, but it's just because it's where it clearly comes from. Those assumptions are fundamentally Christian.
Yes,
And they're about the sacredness of life. And they
yes,
spring from the notion that life is created by God and it's not yours to take it, right? So
yes,
you don't get to kill yourself or anybody else just because they're
that's
sick.
right.
However,
That's right.
I can see the arguments for it. Yes, we all know the arguments for it. We've known people who are very sick or dying in pain. So it's not as if the arguments are not there. And similarly with abortion, you can do the same thing. But fundamentally, both of those amendments to those laws attack full frontally the notion that there's anything sacred about life. And that in itself makes perfect sense if you live in a utilitarian machine society which says, well, there isn't anything sacred about life because we're still operating like Francis Bacon. We're taking the machine apart. And if it makes rational sense to get rid of X, Y, or Z person because they're not contributing or they're getting in the way or whatever, you're effectively in the territory of eugenics at that point, it seems to me. You're moving towards a, a rational system of the elimination of useless eaters and all the rest of it.
Hmm.
And it's where you seem to get to. Now, I'm a Christian, so I'm a bit prejudiced in this regard, but at the same time, it seems logical that that's where you will get to if you just have no sense that life is sacred in any way, whether it's human life or any other life. You will get to the point where you just think, well, why not? If it makes rational utilitarian sense. I mean, maybe it reduces the greatest harm of the greatest number and all this stuff. You end up in that
So
place.
here's a question that I don't know the answer to. Maybe you've thought about it. I'm sure you have. So the obvious comparison when we think about infanticide or killing of the elderly or indeed suicide is Rome, the
Mm.
civilization that preceded Christianity and which in some respects was continued by Christianity. Where a baby wasn't considered to be a person at all until recognized by the paterfamilias, and it was completely morally acceptable to leave an infant on the rubbish heap.
Mm.
If the patriarch of the family had decided that this baby was just not necessary, um, or for some reason was not to be recognized and raised as a member of the family. Um, and I think if I remember rightly, Christians were well known in the early days of the church for rescuing those babies and raising them because they believed they took a very different view about the sacredness of human life, even in the case of abandoned babies. And the development of hospitals and medicine and charity and
Mhm.
alms for the poor and so on, and that all of that sort of social effort that comes with the Christian worldview. So where I'm going with this is, for bouncing off your argument that we're not actually repaganizing, something else is we're doing something else. I'm not sure that it follows that if we abandon the idea of the sacredness of human life or allow it to be dismantled underneath us through Fabianism or whatever we want to call it, um, I'm not sure it follows that we're going to go back, for example, to a more Roman
Mm.
way of doing, are we going to end up, because it doesn't seem as though, for example, we're ending up with the keeper of the family flames,
No.
like Aeneas carrying his father and
Mm,
and the flame, the hearth flame, all the way so
mm.
he can go and found a new city. That doesn't seem to be what's happening. It's more as though an effort is being made to extinguish everything sacred
Yeah,
at
I think
all,
so. Well, I don't
including
think. No, sorry, go on.
so so what do we, if we do allow the Christian conception of the sacredness of human life to be extinguished, what comes next?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? So
It is.
I think that firstly, I have thought about this a lot. We're not going back to anything. It's not as if Christianity was just kind of overlaid on paganism, and when it goes, we go back to being Romans or something. We're not capable of being Romans or Vikings or anything else. Those worlds have completely gone, and actually, the world of medieval Christianity has completely gone, and actually, the world of 20th century liberalism seems to have completely gone as well. I mean, we're not in the place I was in when we were growing up. So those ideas were all based on a completely different set of social assumptions about power and the gods and the rest of it, which are just not here anymore. So. Um, the question of what we end up with is exactly the one that is it's haunting really, because Christianity effectively in the West took all the systems that were before it and either abolished them or more likely in most cases kind of transformed them into something else. So the notion that Christianity just comes along and replaces everything isn't quite true. It transforms it all. But now that that's dying or dead, we still have this ghost Christian morality and ethics that is effectively that we're all formed by, even though we don't accept it. But when we question it, we can't believe in it, because if you don't believe God created human beings, then it makes no sense to say that life is sacred, because the word sacred doesn't mean anything. So you can't do that. So you end up with a society which I don't know if it is. It seems to me like it's unique in history. I mean, a Christian would call it the system of Antichrist, actually, which is effectively a system which looks Christian but isn't Christian at all, and offers liberation but actually leads you to hell on earth. And that is, in my darkest moments, what I think is where I think we're going, because you end up with a society which has no sense of the sacred at all. And I don't think one of those has ever existed. I can't think of a society in history that did not have a sense of the sacred, a sense of the divine, a sense of God or gods or something that is created, something that creates us, something that we go to, something that is beyond this, a sense of the so-called supernatural. We don't have that. We don't have anything except a sense that material reality exists and we now have the power to take it apart. And that's why the Silicon Valley guys look so religious and sound so religious in the way that they talk, because they're going to take or they want to, and I agree with you that this actually can't happen. I don't think it's possible, but they want to take the very stuff of nature apart at the most micro level and put it all back again in a completely different order. And there's no philosophical or spiritual argument against it if you don't believe that there's anything but material reality. And they all talk in terms of justice and equality and progress and all of the other things that sound good. And it's a very weird and dangerous situation. But I don't see I don't see a parallel from history, unless I'm
No,
missing.
no, neither do I. And I mean, if I have at least a sort of a micron or two more optimism than perhaps
Mm.
you do,
Most
it
people
might
do.
actually it might be ironically as a result of being more extremely online than you are.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
let,
that's
let, let,
glad it has some benefits. Good.
well, you have to
Probably
handle
does.
with care, but
Yeah.
let me explain what I mean by that. My working hypothesis, and I hope I'm right about this, even though it remains to be seen, is that the the belief that the material reality is the only thing that exists will become increasingly more untenable the more time the more permeated we are by digital as distinct from print culture,
Mm.
because there are different patterns of thinking and cognition and reading and absorbing information that come with scrolling as distinct from reading. There's a sense in which the print paradigm is what gave us materialism, right? I mean
Hmm.
that more erudite people than me have written that intellectual genealogy and written that piece of
Mm.
cultural history, right?
Yeah.
That's the there's a sense in which the materialism and rationalism and so on are directly downstream of the printing press
I think there's a lot to that.
and Protestantism
Hmm.
and all of that, right? So and I think the digital revolution is already well underway with undoing all of that, because it has to.
Hmm.
Reading online just forms people in fundamentally different ways. You know,
Does.
we don't think in linear in such linear terms, and people are becoming visibly, markedly by the year less rationalistic. Remember
Hmm.
how mental everybody went during COVID? That couldn't have happened in a
How
print
could I
world.
forget? Yeah,
Right, here.
absolutely.
It could that could not have
Hmm.
happened in the pre-digital world. It simply wouldn't have been possible.
Well, I don't think any of the hysterical wokeness and the culture war on both right and left could have happened without smartphones.
No, no, exactly. None of this would be possible, were people not increasingly formed by digital content consumption as
Hmm.
distinct from from print reading.
Yeah, that's quite
It
true.
simply couldn't happen. And I, you know, this is it's not inevitable, but it's possible that people can go from developing the kind of pattern recognition you need to be able to make sense of meme cultures, for
Hmm.
example, to applying the same capacity for pattern recognition in the real world. At which point you just start being able to see formal cause again, like just
Hmm.
perceive it directly, rather than sort of trying to reason your way into it.
Hmm.
You know, and that doesn't necessarily follow. You know, there's still a kind of cognitive leap you have to make, but I think people are very much more primed for it.
Yeah.
To the degree that in extremely online cultures, people now talk very straightforwardly about demons,
Hmm.
because and they got there by watching ideas develop, evolve, and exert agency in real time on the internet.
That's very
And
interesting, actually. Yeah.
this is, I mean, it's not necessarily cause for optimism. You know,
Hmm.
it could be it could be cause for a lot of things as well as optimism.
Yeah.
But I think what I and this was my main, I don't want to say pushback to your book, but my main response to it was, please, Paul, don't lose faith, because actually the machine breeds its own backlash. It's already
Yeah.
doing that.
I think that's true. And actually, obviously, I have a reputation as an extreme doomer, which is not exactly undeserved. But partly as a result of becoming a Christian, but not just that. I find myself in a position which, again, isn't optimistic, but is hopeful. I mean, apart from anything else, there's a life beyond this one, in my view, so I don't have to worry as much as I used to about this one. But also, I've seen that backlash in real time. Maybe becoming a Christian, which I didn't expect to do, was part of it. But since I started writing about that, the number of communications I get and the number of people I meet who are going not just back into Christianity or into Christianity, but more broadly are doing exactly what you said, which is starting to see all this in spiritual terms and actually rejecting a kind of machine's metaphysics, if you like, especially young
Yeah,
people, because they've grown up,
yeah,
the
yeah.
ones who grew
Yes,
up
yes. This is what
completely.
I mean.
I
This is
mean, I've
what I
got a
mean.
17-year-old daughter, right? So, I mean, she's never had a smartphone. She doesn't want one. And she rejects the whole thing. But I meet a lot of kids and they're extremely switched on about what is
Yeah,
going on. And
yeah.
because they've had this stuff crammed down their throats from birth, yes, of course, they can see the convenience of it and all that, but they can feel the emptiness of it too. And actually, I
Yeah,
think that my cause for hope, which is manifesting around us everywhere, is that actually, beyond a certain point, humans can't live with this because
yeah, exactly.
we
Yeah,
need God and we need nature and we need community and we need people and we need bodies
yeah.
because that's who we are.
In the same way as we can't actually abolish human nature.
No,
It's
indeed.
just not possible.
No,
You
it's
know,
not as if we
the
haven't
moment
been
you
tried
try,
before.
you end up sawing off the branch
Yeah.
that you're sitting
Well,
on.
we've been
It's just
trying
not
for at
possible.
least 100 years, and it's
Hasn't happened yet.
how would you even count the deaths? Um,
Right.
I think
Yeah, no, not only has it not worked, but yeah, as you say, you know, the stack of atrocities gets higher and higher. But and furthermore, you know, the more determinedly people try, you know, the more monsters they
mm,
create. And eventually, I don't know. I mean, people are going to try and CRISPR babies.
mm,
They're going to try and gene edit babies for intelligence. You know,
mm.
as though being more intelligent has ever done anybody any favors beyond.
Yeah, quite
Well, I mean, I should qualify that a bit.
overrated.
Like,
It's overrated.
it's a bit like money. Like, not having any money at all is
Mm,
rubbish.
yeah,
But there's definitely there's a ceiling beyond
there
which
is.
having more money
There's a
doesn't
little
really make
bell
much.
curve, isn't there?
And you know, if you're once you're in that bell curve, like you might like you're sort of all right, and
Mm.
you don't you know, and yeah, it's sort of diminishing returns, I think, after a certain point. And surely it's much the same with intelligence. In that, some of the most tortured people I know are some of the smartest.
Mm.
Also, and also some of the most socially awkward or
Mm.
lonely, or yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's a very two-edged sword. So I question the idea that gene editing babies for intelligence is, but again, it's subject to the same logic of
Mm.
the human nature self-correcting,
Mm.
because if we try, we'll find we'll discover, we'll learn the hard way what the downside is of
Mm.
having a whole of selecting for freakishly intelligent people. It'll turn out that I don't know, they're brilliant at theoretical physics, but they can't tie their own shoelaces. Like, we all
Yeah,
met
well,
that
there's
guy,
quite a
right?
lot of them around already. I mean,
Right, right, right.
we'll
Or
also be
or, or
selecting
they're or
for.
they're panda-like about reproducing.
Mm.
You know,
Well, I'm sure we'll also be selecting for looks and, square jaws and blonde hair and large breasts and whatever else we think our children would benefit from, if
right,
that's
but
not
I mean,
happening
you
already.
you look at, if you look at the people who already have work done, you go to
Mm.
some parts of the world, it's very visible. You can, the sort of normative standard. This becomes particularly noticeable, I think, if you're a woman,
Mm. Yeah.
and about my age.
Mm.
Um, there are, there are particularly the west coast of America, where I look about 20 years older than the rest of the women my age, just because there are treatments which are just normal there if you're middle or upper class, um, which aren't somewhere else. But there's also this really weird thing which happens where everybody who does that and then gets too into it, their faces all start to look alike.
I've
There's
noticed
something
that.
really
So,
uncanny that happens
yeah,
there.
it is, and it's almost like a slightly crude version of transhumanism going on there already, and it's become also totally normalized in my adult life over the last 20 years. The notion of just having work done, and as you
Mm.
say, then you end up with a bunch of people who all look disturbingly similar in a
Yeah,
slightly
yeah, yeah.
way.
I mean, this is one of those really interesting edge cases, I think. For going, my sort of basic heuristic for thinking about the dividing line between medical treatments which are there to sort of to heal in relation to a normative understanding of human health, and those which are designed to augment that or re-engineer it, which I think is a good if crude heuristic for understanding the distinction between invasive medical treatments which are ordered to the Hippocratic paradigm and those which are ordered to the transhumanist paradigm. And cosmetic interventions are a really interesting edge case in that sense. I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a dental implant, which is
Mm.
a fairly transhumanist medical intervention, right? In the sense that there's very little to distinct. I have a cyborg tooth, right?
Mm.
But there's a sense in which it's healing something which you would normatively expect to be there, and it replaces something like if I had a cyborg tooth with a CB radio
Mm.
installed in it, or a microchip that allowed me to scroll stock prices in front of in my glasses, like that would be transhumanist. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that my cyborg tooth is that different in kind from a denture, right?
Mm.
Except in being more permanent. I
Yeah.
don't know. We could argue the toss about that, but then there's a really grey area between reparation and enhancement in that stuff, particularly once you get into cosmetic interventions,
Mm.
because you could argue that it's still being done with reference to a normative understanding of health and beauty. Um,
Mm.
and perhaps the point where the uncanny valley thing creeps in is where you're trying to hold on to something which isn't normative for your age, or
Yes. Yeah, you're resisting time, aren't you? That's what you're
yeah,
doing. I mean,
yeah.
it's a really interesting question this year because it does get to the heart of maybe the biggest question in the book, which is also the biggest question in my life, which is if you don't like this trajectory that we're on, which neither of us do, um, what do you know? Well, you may have answered this question already. So what do you do about it? So your answer is the only way out is through, which I'd like to dig into. But one of my attempts in the book to answer the question is to talk about drawing lines. And you actually just gave us an example of what that line could be. So you can't draw a line of the use of technology because that means nothing and it would go right back to the beginning of
No,
time.
I
But
mean,
you
I
have
think
to draw a
you'd
line
have to be a
somewhere.
you'd
You
have to
don't
be a
draw a
complete
line.
psycho. Yeah,
Yeah, and if you don't draw a line, then you end up with transhumanist cyborg
yeah.
paradise. So where do you draw the line, or is that even the wrong way to think about it? I mean, I'm thinking in terms of practically. People always say, "Well, what can we do about this if it's really this bad?" And there isn't one universal answer, but the question of where you personally draw lines on things.
I mean, I feel like, I feel perhaps a good way of thinking about it is to call to mind as often as possible uh our Gestalt picture of what it is to be a human. I
Hmm.
mean, the visual image I always have in my mind is that, I mean, it's actually it's well into the modernist era, arguably. But you know that very famous that is it that very famous drawing from I think it's Leonardo da Vinci of the human in
Yeah, I think that
various
is Da
you
Vinci.
know the one I mean.
Yeah.
As just being the sort of the normative form and figure and geometry of the human person. That some if you take that as a symbol denoting the Gestalt picture we have of what it is to be a living, flourishing human in relation with other living, flourishing humans.
Hmm.
My picture of that might be a little bit different to yours, but by and large, we're thinking about the same thing, right? And we can both understand it as something which has an existence of some kind. I think I'm not enough of a theologian or a metaphysician to argue the toss on what kind of what the nature of that reality is, but it's real, right? In the sense that if you try and make humans conform to something which isn't that, it just doesn't work. All you end up with is the monsters stuff from
Mm.
nightmares. And intuitively, even a little child can recognize what that is.
Mm.
We have two arms and we have two legs and we have a normal developmental pathway, and we come in two sexes and blah blah. There's a whole picture, but it's a living picture, and it's one that we see from the inside, not as a series of criteria that you have to fulfill from the outside. It's a sort of living narrative, holistic picture, a spiritual one
Mm.
fundamentally.
Yeah.
Um, and and perhaps the way to think about these sort particularly these sort of difficult medical questions, and perhaps also the technological ones, is to hold any one of these where we're not completely sure, is to hold them up against that picture and say, is this likely to further the flourishing of this Gestalt
Mm.
understanding of what it is to be a person, or is it likely to interfere with that?
I think that's a
Um,
very
and and just to try and make a judgment on that basis.
that's a very interesting way of looking at it, actually, and that would then make a distinction between, say, a pacemaker in your heart, which is trying to make your heart work as it should, and Elon Musk's chip in your brain, which is allowing you
Yes,
to communicate with the internet, right? Then you've got a
yes,
clear line you
yes,
can draw. I mean, I've
yes.
always I've always thought that in terms of the horror of the Internet of bodies communicating with the Internet of things. That's a
Right,
very clear line. If
right,
you're
right, right.
putting digital technologies into your body to enable you to effectively become
Mm,
part of the internet physically,
yeah,
then you've crossed a line that didn't exist before, which is not the same line as
that's
you
right.
you put a dental implant in or have a
That's right.
screw in your leg or something.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, a dental implant or a pacemaker are ordered to that Gestalt picture, in the sense that the normative picture of a flourishing human has a certain number of teeth.
Hmm.
If you the difference between a dental bridge and a dental implant in that sense isn't very significant
Hmm.
if the aim of that prosthesis is just to restore what would normatively be there.
Make your teeth work.
Um, yeah, to make your teeth work.
Hmm.
And a pacemaker is arguably doing the same job. Yes, it's a mechanical intervention which is hosted actually inside your body, but it's there to make your heart beat normally and to support your body in working normally. In a sense,
Not that
there's
turn you into something else.
there's not a huge amount of difference in kind between that and a wheelchair, which allows a disabled person to get around.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks a wheelchair is a transhumanist
No.
horror.
No,
It's a
indeed. I haven't heard that argument
it's an
anyway.
it's an, a completely appropriate assistive technology.
Hmm.
Nobody has a problem with that. But as you say, there's a difference in kind between that and trying to make a man cosmetically resemble a woman,
Hmm.
or implanting a chip in somebody's brain which allows them to communicate directly with the
I mean,
internet.
not least because
Those are things that you can never normally do.
yeah, and there are also things that are often usually done to healthy people as well. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah,
not medical interventions trying to,
yeah.
change.
Actually, one of my routes into thinking about this and trying to get my head around the nuances of it was this proposed enhanced gains, which I think is another really interesting edge case, comparable perhaps to cosmetic surgery. In that this is being funded by a couple of Silicon Valley, very wealthy Silicon Valley investors who've proposed a kind of Olympics, but for a pro-doping Olympics, basically.
Right, okay.
Right. So instead of banning anabolic steroids and all of the other performance enhancing drugs and technologies, they're
Hmm.
going to say use them all, and we'll give loads of money to the win. We want you to optimize yourself using all of the technologies at your disposal, and then come and have an athletic games, which
Wow.
is it's a really interesting edge case if you're
Hmm.
thinking about transhumanism,
Hmm.
because I mean you could argue, I'm not sure if I'd want to, but you could make the case that increasing somebody's capacity to run fast or lift weights or something using cocktail of chemical enhancements is different in kind from example cutting somebody's legs off and giving them wheels.
Hmm.
Um, and because one of them is still ordered to this sort of normative human functioning, just kind of
Hmm.
enhancing it, whereas the other one is turning somebody into some kind of weird kind of chimera human machine thing.
Hmm.
I don't know. These are just
Yeah, you
these are
get
really
into the
interesting edge cases.
you really get into the grey areas, don't you, when it starts happening?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And I think but it's really important to think this stuff through. And the best heuristic I've been able to come up with so far is the restorative versus meliorist one.
Hmm.
But you can't think that unless you're holding that picture in your mind. The Leonardo man.
You
You've just got to keep that in the front of your mind.
you also have to hold a picture in the front of your mind, as you say, that's a spiritual picture as well as just a purely physical one. But you also have to hold a picture about, in some way, this is harder maybe, about relationships and what kind of relationships humans should have. Because our
Yes.
relationship, for example, with the natural world and the fact that the natural world still continues to exist as a wild thing, our relationships with other humans in communities, in families, this is harder because, some of these things are obviously culturally conditioned a bit. Um, but still, the machine needs to break all of those relationships in order to turn us simply into individual technological consumers who can function in an entirely artificial world. So there's also something about the normative human functioning in normative relationships with other things, human and non-human, which is part of that picture as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, absolutely.
hard to
Because
find
yeah, I
that.
think
Crucial.
here's a case in point. There's a very sad story of the women who were the East German women who were treated unknowingly with anabolic steroids so that they could cheat in various Olympic Games during the second half of the 20th century. A number of them have suffered all kinds of appalling uh, biomedical difficulties in adult life. I think one of them now lives as a trans man because she was simply it was just not after having been through so much masculinizing treatment, it was simply not possible to live, or it was too uncomfortable for her socially, to try and live as what she really is. And I think there are, there are broken relationships, and there may even have been yeah, broken relationships, and health issues and all kinds of difficulties. I mean, this is also true of a number of young people who were sold the idea of transgender identity and who are now living with horrific health complications, which were completely iatrogenic. And I think you're right to expand the frame beyond just the individual person, to try and think about the situated person. Because I mean, if you think about a 15-year-old athletically gifted girl, for example, who's then doped with masculinizing hormones, and she in the very narrow context of an Olympic Games, she might win medals. But then what happened? What's life like for her 20 years later? Um, it's a much more complicated picture.
There's something about this word you keep using, normative, which has become. I mean, you gave a talk recently, didn't you? What was it? What was the title? I can't remember. It was "Human Nature is Real" or something, wasn't
Mm,
it?
mm.
And it's one of these statements which seem obvious, but have actually somehow become radically controversial. Right? There,
Yes,
there is a thing as human. There is such a thing as human nature, and there is such a thing as normal.
yes,
Which throughout my entire life, I mean, you probably had this as well when you were young, when you're a sort of young left-wing activist. Nobody accepts that there's a thing called normal. That
that's right.
everything must be deconstructed and broken down because that's
That's
an
right.
oppressive concept. When you can see whether there would have been points in history in which that would have been an oppressive concept to some people, clearly. But we're now at a point in history where the oppressive thing is living in a society in which everything's been broken down. And then you have to try and
We a normophobic culture.
we're totally normophobic, but then you have to try and restore the norm, which again was based on a certain metaphysical idea, a
Right,
Christian idea
right.
in this case,
I've really wrestled with
without the
this. I mean,
metaphysics.
this has been a major sort of theoretical problem for me for some time now. It's trying to figure out, you know, trying to figure out how to reverse engineer a coherent case for human nature being real,
Mm,
without having to start with Thomas Aquinas, because the moment you start with Thomas Aquinas, unfortunately, sorry Catholics, anyone, you've lost.
mm,
In terms of the contemporary discourse, it's just people shut down. They won't hear it.
mm.
Um, and yet human nature is real. And I remember I was trying to explain this theoretical problem I had, and somebody was like, somebody said to me, well, maybe you should stop trying to make the case. Maybe you should just say it because it's true.
Mm.
And I was like, huh, do you know what? That makes much more
Yes,
sense. You should
that
just
is.
say it.
I'm afraid that is the only solution. I mean, that's.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
what you have to do is stop,
Stop apologizing for things that are true and just say
but
them.
also stop worrying about the contemporary discourse in a way, because the contemporary discourse is never going to accept a number of things which turn out to be true because it's gone in completely the wrong direction, and the only way you change
I
it
think that's true, but you also have to
is
meet people somewhat where they are.
you do, but you can speak to the contemporary discourse whilst also saying, I believe this thing, which is generally not believed to be true, and then explaining why. I mean,
Right,
also, I
right,
find the
right.
contemporary discourse is changing. I mean, to go back to this Christianity conversation again, I mean, the conversation around Christianity in the West today is somehow incredibly lively again, in a way
Yes, it's really interesting.
that it wasn't
It's
even
very,
10
very
years
interesting.
ago. And
Yeah,
having these conversations in the age of the new atheists, where no one would be listening, but now lots of people are listening.
yeah,
And something's
yeah, yeah,
going on, which actually is a movement, maybe not backwards, maybe forwards, who knows, but back towards the center, in a way that the contemporary discourse is a lot more open to the sacred than it was even five
yeah,
years ago. I think precisely
yeah.
because
Absolutely.
everything has gone in this mad direction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also, people are much better at pattern recognition than they used to be.
Yeah, well, as you say, maybe they've been spending
Mm.
so much time on the internet that they can they can all
You
see
know,
what's going on.
there are plenty of other directions you can take that capacity in. Some of them healthier than others.
Oh yeah, no, they
But
don't
one
have
of
to be
the
healthy at all.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, it's certain some of it manifests as insane conspiracy theories or
Yeah, or insane versions of religion or terrible. I mean, there's no
yeah, and
reason to
there's that as
believe that
well.
a future in which people are being metaphysical is somehow more virtuous. I mean, it's the whole
Right,
point
right,
of,
right.
for example, again, to go back to Christianity, it's very much your personal work. It's your personal struggle. Becoming a Christian does not make you a good person. If that were true, then we'd all be fine. But there's no system which, through being automatically adopted, makes you virtuous. Alas, you have to try and do the thing of becoming virtuous. But then
Maybe Elon will invent the brain chip. I'm joking. I'm
I
joking.
think you probably will. I'm sure Elon's going to remove the need.
I if somebody invented a brain chip that made me automatically virtuous, I'm not sure I'd be. I'm not sure I'd be up for it.
Well, you'd
I
have to
sort of
ask what
feel
they meant
like,
by virtuous to start with.
well, yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah.
that, but also, I mean, you know, it might be a little bit like that. What's it the anti-obesity drug, which seems to just eliminate any sort of troublesome desires at all.
Mm.
People no longer desire food, and so I read a really sad article about, you know, well, this woman was describing how she'd started using Manjaro or whatever it's called, you know, one of those, and had lost weight and it was great, but also she just lost all interest in cooking for her family and everybody was
Mm.
miserable. And I
Mm.
thought, I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, that
Like, you
doesn't.
know, I sort of get why she would want to be able to fit into her trousers again, but
Mm.
I also don't really blame her family for being sad. Like
No,
that's a
completely. Yeah.
you know,
No.
somehow the heart had gone out of their home in the
Side
course
effect
of
of, yeah, the heart versus technology. Yeah.
yeah, and then yeah, I don't know if somebody if these drugs just, you know, eliminate troublesome, you know, the little demon that sits on your shoulder and says go on, have another one, you know,
Mm.
whatever the
Yeah.
temptation in question is. You know, if you can just chemically eliminate that, then is there a price? I don't know. I think we're on course to find out with this
Well, we're back
weightless
to the
drugs.
abolition of man again, and we're
Yeah.
basically a Brave New World, and that's the entire plot of Brave New World. You can do these
But
things.
here's the thing. I think we will figure out. It'll probably take 10 or 15 years to figure out what the price is.
Mm,
But I mean, it took us 50 years with the pill to figure
yeah.
out what the price is.
Mm,
But there is a price. There really is of trying to abolish uh, differences in sexual, sex dimorphism
mm.
fundamentally. There's absolutely a price. And we'll figure out what it is, in the context of weight loss drugs as well. It'll turn out that actually that little demon of troublesome desire on our shoulders is also the thing which powers X, Y, and Z, without which we become, less than we were, or different, or less able to be ourselves.
And
And then
this,
there'll be a backlash because at that point, every time we try and abolish some aspect of ourselves in those ways, the eventual result is that aspect of normative human nature fundamentally comes more clearly into focus in a way which we had almost completely forgotten over the course of modernity. And this is really, I think, this is the core of my sort of hopefulness about the and what I see as the mechanism for the way out being through. In that, we're going to try and abolish, um, we're going to try and re-engineer every aspect of our nature, and we're going to try and technologize away fear and hatred and vengefulness and licentiousness and all the rest, all the other sinful qualities that we have. We'll try and invent a pill for all of them. And all that will happen in the long term is that, people will take the pills, and eventually they'll realize that actually wrestling with your inner demons is necessary in order to lead a full life.
mm,
And that actually not leading a full life is not worth the it's not worth being technologically liberated from those things, because you become too crippled in other respects.
yeah.
Um, And in the course of that, if all we're going to end up doing in trying to abolish human nature is just rediscovering it again. The end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
I think that's exactly right. I think that is probably also the perfect place to end.
And a note of optimism,
Exactly.
somewhat, sort
I
of.
can't think of anywhere to go beyond that. That is,
Cool.
I think I think that's exactly right. Brilliant. Look, I really enjoyed talking to you, Mary. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, Paul. This is so much fun. And thank you for having me.